speaking with Bryce Tippe, the Green Party candidate in the newly created Kelowna Centre riding. Bryce, welcome to the campaign. Talk about your first venture into politics.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's been a blast. I only got the candidacy 3 weeks ago, so I've been spending a lot of time playing catch up, getting signatures, going door to door, getting my face out there. I mean, some of the candidates got their, I think they got their candidacy in February and March. So I'm behind, but I've got the energy and the willingness to, want to be able to get my name out there.
Unfortunately, some of those candidates that got their papers back in February, their party left them. So I mean, you've walked into a very interesting time in BC politics.
Yeah, I mean, it is really fascinating. I mean, I do feel for a lot of the BC United candidates who kind of got left out to dry, kind of like that. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It's a new riding as well that I'm running in. So there's a lot of unknowns in this that's going on right now. New parties, new unknowns. Like the BC NDP might actually be competitive for the first time in forever in a Kelowna riding as well. So yeah, I mean, change.
You're in an interesting riding. You've got downtown Kelowna, which is incredibly urban. You've got the Glenmore Valley, which is a mix of residential plus some agricultural properties out there. So you've been talking to a diverse group of people. What's door knocking been like in a riding like that?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think people don't like to be bothered at home sometimes. And I'm one of those people, so I get it. But honestly, I've had some pretty great conversations. I think a lot of people are just really passionate about certain issues that they really want to talk about and they care about. I think my biggest challenge when talking to my potential constituents is assuring them that I'm not only just caring solely about the climate and that I can also prioritize other things, and that I'm not some ideologue or mainly just motivated by some arbitrary ideology, and that I am a serious person who has a lot of really great ideas for British Columbia policy-wise, and that I would love to be able to give it the chance to apply that.
Well, here's your opportunity to talk about some of those great policy ideas that you have.
One of my biggest concerns, the main reason why I really got interested in politics, is that I graduated high school in 2009, so during the recession, and then we saw all of these protests for Occupy Wall Street, and there's been so much tumultuous kind of events that have happened since I reached adulthood. And I've noticed that there's been a lot of disillusionment and a lack of faith in institutions, and I've seen a lot of even worldwide, globally, there's a lot of anti-democratic movements within established democratic countries. And so for me, that's something that I find quite concerning, and something that I think that there's a lot of grievance that's going on that isn't really, I think a lot of people in power often dismiss these grievances, and I don't think it's really conducive to a healthy kind of democracy. I think it's important to be listened to, even if it's somebody that you don't necessarily agree with. And that way we can actually find a compromise and a dialogue that can actually is what democracy is based off of, right? And so that's why I really got into it and wanted to. So my concern is that politicians and people in power aren't properly representing the interests of common people. And I think that politicians for too long have allowed to be their own police, and I would like to see that change. And I think that we could institute reforms within government that would make it so that politicians have to be more accountable, transparent, and representative towards their constituents.
You just graduated with a degree in political science, yeah. I believe. Yeah. So that brings you an interesting perspective through that, recently out of school, into the political arena.
I'm an institutionalist, so I believe that institutions and the framework that make them up are the best way to really, they're the heart and blood of the society, right? And institutions are systems, they're machines. And just like any other machine, you got to maintain it. And if you see something's going wrong, I always like to use this analogy that if you have, if I developed a robot and I built it and then I just pressed play and I started walking and then it started lit on fire and started sputtering, I would be like, well, I did my job. I'm done. That's great. But that's kind of how we treat systems that we create that are made up of people, right? We create an institution, we'll see flaws with them and be like, oh, but we already did it. We're done. and we don't go back and rectify the mistakes that we're seeing, right? And so I think that there constantly needs to be an adaptiveness and a flexibility at play, and we constantly need to, because it's kind of like, people are always going to try to game a system, so you constantly need to tweak the rules for every time that people try to find a way to exploit it, right?
Talking to a number of the candidates, obviously affordability housing is a big issue. Healthcare is a big issue. Education is a big issue. With your riding being part of your riding being downtown Kelowna, might I assume that crime and safety, homelessness, drugs are at the top of the list?
Totally. I mean, I've actually had 2 instances in the past 6 months, because I take transit, where I've actually had to call emergency services because of interactions with homeless people. At one instance, a guy was using drugs at the bus stop right next to me. And so I have had firsthand experiences with this, right? But some of the other candidates that I'm running against, for example, Christina Lowen, in an interview in February said that there deserves to be a stigma around drug use, and that's why we need to recriminalize it. And so I guess just let the jails deal with it, when substance abuse issue is a mental health issue. And I don't like the output either. I didn't like getting threatened by somebody on the street. But I can understand that it's not going to solve the issue to just put people in jail back and forth all the time. And that costs taxpayer people money, right? So we got to holistically solve these things, and that's what I understand. And so if we have a mental health issue, there was a study that was recently done a few years ago nationally by the RCMP. And they looked into it, and they were like, okay, what effect would there be if we treated substance abuse as not a crime issue, but a health issue? And they said, if we were to do this, if we decriminalize hard drugs, we then need to make sure that the healthcare system has the capacity to deal with it. But that's what the BC NDP didn't do. They decriminalized it, and then we didn't have the capacity. We already had a healthcare system that was already so overburdened with people, and then you had the COVID pandemic, and then drug decriminalization, and we just don't have the capacity. And that's the other thing with involuntary care that's being proposed now by the BC NDP and the BC Conservatives. Sure, ideally, if we could involuntarily force people to get treatment, but their problem is we have a shortage of healthcare workers. So, okay, we're going to do involuntary care. How? Who's doing it? It makes no sense. We can't just wave a magic wand because we don't like something and wish it away. We actually have to understand the causing of the issue and the actual necessary components that will make up a solution that's realistic.
And the unfortunate part is many people just want the problem to go away.
Exactly, right? But you can't wave a wand, and that's what I'm seeing right now, is people are just saying, we don't like it, and so we're going to do this. But I don't think that just throwing people in jails is going to help. And if you throw people in prisons, what often actually happens is they actually are more likely to get involved in crime. Now they get into prisons, they actually make contacts with gangs and stuff. And actually they will get out, and their recidivism rate, which is the repeat offender rate, actually goes up. So it's just, we need to not take the emotion and what we wish could be as the result out of it, and say, okay, how can we actually solve it objectively, not based on how we wish the world was? Because there's a lot of things that I wish could be, but that's not realistic. It's kind of delusional.
And part of the solution too is, and it's part of the solution for everything, is housing. Yeah. Affordable housing, attainable housing, and the fact, for not only for that group, but for you and I.
I do think that we do have a very much a positive feedback loop that's kind of happening within BC right now, because you have people who are ending up homeless due to the lack of affordable housing, and then when you're living on the street, you might end up using drugs, right? So you get this kind of all of these variables are at play and they're impacting one another, and we do need to do a lot more. One of the things that I would be in support of, and I don't even know what the BC Green Party feels about this, but I think that we should ban foreign ownership. That if you want to own real estate within Canada, you either have to be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. New Zealand implemented a similar policy in place because they realized that the commodity of housing was so limited that people who live here were being pushed out by foreign investors. And we shouldn't be treated as a safe haven for rich foreign nationals be able to keep their money in case one of their autocratic regimes sees their assets. Now they've got money saved away in Canada. That's not what housing should be for. Houses are meant to be lived in, right? They're not a stock option.
Bryce Tippe, I want to give you an opportunity, as I do to all the candidates, to speak directly to the constituents of Kelowna Centre and tell them why they should put mark beside your name when they go into the voting booth on October 19th?
I care about quality policies. I'm not an ideologue. I am pretty much pragmatic in all of the things that I want to accomplish. I know when people hear BC Greens, they have a very simplistic idea of what it is. But I can promise you, if I was to get into the legislature, unlike the other candidates, I would listen to my constituents first, my values second, and then my party third. Because what often happens when people get elected into government is that they get into the legislature and then they do what their party tells them to do. I would not do that because I feel like democracy is based on people. So it should be bottom-up leadership, not top-down. So if you vote for me, you're voting for change.
Bryce Tippe, interesting conversation. Good luck on October the 19th.
Thank you so much. I was so happy to be here.